Okay. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation. Nicola Harrison is the author of two historical fiction novels, Montauk and The Showgirl. She is a graduate of UCLA and received her MFA from Stony Brook. Prior to writing novels, she worked as a fashion journalist in New York City and now lives in Manhattan Beach, California with her husband, two sons, and a high maintenance chihuahua named Lola.
You may hear.
Oh, good. I hope so. And now for our featured author. Fiona Davis is the New York Times bestselling author of several novels, including The Dollhouse, The Address, The Masterpiece, The Chelsea Girls, and of course, The Lions of Fifth Avenue. She lives in New York City and is a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Virginia and the Columbia Journalism School. She's here tonight to talk about her latest novel, this beautiful book right here, The Magnolia Palace. So please join me in welcoming Fiona Davis and Nicola Harrison.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for the wonderful introduction and for hosting us. And thank you to Nicola for being in conversation with me today. I'm just thrilled, even though you're way out in California, we're next door.
I know, I'm thrilled to be doing it. Thanks so much. So you have had a busy week. This book has been out in the world for a week now. How's your launch week been?
Oh, it was just wonderful, mainly because the night of the launch, we were able to do an in-person event at Rizzoli Bookstore in New York City, which it's a beautiful bookstore, and the fact that we could all be there and a lot of our friends and fellow authors came, and it was just terrific. We had a great time. So that was really fun because it was really the first time in a long time that we've been able to all meet in one place. So it's been great. Yeah.
Great. Well, you know that I adored this book so much. I think I sent you a late night text on New Year's Day because I binge read this book and loved it so much. But for everyone else who has not yet had a chance to read it, can you tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Sure. So all of my books are set in landmark New York City buildings. And this one is set at the Frick collection. And the Frick was the home for the Frick family. That was Henry Clay Frick and his wife and daughter. And he was a big industrialist as well as a major art collector. And so the book takes place in two time periods, in 1919 and in 1966. So in 1919, it's when it was a mansion and a home. In the 60s, it's when it was a museum. And it kind of goes back and forth in time. And kind of the quick description is in 1919, it's from the point of view of this artist model named Lillian, who falls on hard times, has a big scandal, and she hides out at the Frick mansion as the private secretary to Helen Frick, the adult daughter of Henry Clay Frick, as a way to kind of stay away from the police. And as she does that, she gets caught up in the family drama, including romantic trysts and a stolen pink diamond known as the Magnolia diamond. And then in the 60s, it's from the point of view of this fashion model named Veronica. And she's doing a Vogue photo shoot at the Frick mansion at the museum, goes terribly wrong. And she gets locked inside during a 3-day blizzard, along with an intern named Joshua. And she stumbles upon a series of hidden messages in the mansion that are tucked in the works of art. And that leads her and Joshua on this scavenger hunt that she hopes might solve all of her financial problems, as well as possibly solve a decades-old murder in the Frick family. So there are a lot of moving parts. And with all my books, there's kind of two timelines and an element of mystery that keeps the story going, and plot twists and, a surprising ending, most hopefully.
I love hearing you talk about it because it's bringing it all back to me. I think what is so wonderful about your books and that you set them in these landmark buildings is that a lot of people have their own connections to these buildings. Either they live in New York City and they've been to them, or they visited. And so it's so nice to be able to weave their own memories into the stories as they're reading it. So what made you decide to set the Magnolia Palace at the Frick?
Yeah, it was a bit of a risk because it's not as well known as my other locations. Grand Central, everybody knows. The Dakota, most people know. The public library, everybody knows.
Yeah.
But the Frick collection is unusual because it's on Fifth Avenue and it's a museum. But it's not like the Guggenheim or the Met, which are these huge art museums. It's smaller. It's only 3 stories. And it's just filled with this beautiful, beautiful art. And yet at the same time, it's filled with all the furnishings that were still in the house, from the 1910s. So the rugs, the sofas. So when you walk inside, it's as if the Frick family went off to a dinner party and they might be back at any moment.
That's
And
so true.
right? So it's kind of frozen in time. And that's why I think if you ask any New Yorker what their favorite museum is, they tend to say the Frick. There's just something special and secret about it.
Yes. Yes. And actually, when my husband and I were dating long distance and I was in New York and he was in San Diego, the Frick was one of the first dates we went on in New York when he came out to visit. And it was his idea. He took me, and I had heard of it, but I had never been. So when I was reading this book, I could imagine, I could remember what it was like. And I loved it so much. It had so many good memories for me. So
that's a prime first date, by the way, or
right?
early date. That's impressive. I can see why you married him.
Yes, he did well. So you got to go on a behind the scenes tour of the Frick. What was that like? And how did it help you develop your plot?
Yeah, so I reached out and they were so helpful. And, as kind of, if you look at the building from the outside, it's this beautiful, limestone building. It's kind of set back from Fifth Avenue. There's this lawn where the magnolia trees are. And as you walk inside, it's only the first floor that's open to the public. And so in there you have like this beautiful staircase with an organ tucked under it, and, the library and the dining room. There's this huge room in the back, which, in a normal kind of Gilded Age mansion, it would be the ballroom. But because of Frick, it was an art gallery. So those are the spaces you get to go on. But I got to go down into the basement that's where the kitchen would be and where the male staffers lived back in the day. And then on top of that, there's this bowling alley that was built in the basement in 1914, has an automatic ball return. It still works. It's this gleaming kind of pine and maple wood. And so surprises like that jumped out at me. And then on the second floor, you have where the Frick family would sleep, and like the breakfast room. And on the very top floor, that's where the female maids would sleep. And there's a fur vault that's still there, no furs. Wow. And, a trunk storage room that's now an office. And even though a lot of these spaces were made into administrative spaces after it became a museum, you still get such a sense of what it was like when the family lived there. It's really beautiful. And the thing is, I think about it, and I'm sure you feel this way, that as you're walking along and exploring it, there's these huge windows and the sunlight and these beautiful furnishings, but the focus in every hallway and in every room is always the art.
The art, right.
Because, there's Turners and Renoirs and Rembrandts. There are 34 Vermeers in the world, and 3 of them are at the Frick.
Wow.
It's incredible. And so, you really get this beautiful sense of what the building was like. And when it was built in 1914, it cost $5 million to build, which would be $80 million today. And then when Frick died in 1919, the art on the walls was valued at $40 million.
Oh my gosh.
It's insane. It's so special.
Wow. I mean, I think that behind the scenes tour that you got to take is a reason enough to become an author.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. Right. I think it's because we're kind of snoopy. We like to snoop around.
That's a good perk.
Yeah. And doing research, you're doing it all in the name of your book.
Right. So how did the mansion come to be built?
Yeah. So Mr. Frick was an interesting guy. And so he grew up in kind of coal country in Pennsylvania. He made his first million by the time he was 30, producing coke, which is something that's used to produce steel, which was very much in demand at that point. And so he married a woman named Adelaide, and they settled actually in Pittsburgh first. But he started collecting art, and then he decided he wanted to move to New York. And so he moved there with his wife, Adelaide, and their grown daughter, Helen, who was in her 20s at that point. And he hired the architecture firm Carrere and Hastings, who, by the way, also did the New York Public Library, to build this mansion. And at that time, keep in mind, the Vanderbilts were plopping down French chateaus on Fifth Avenue. It was just crazy. In the book, it was called Vanderbuilding, which meant, creating these crazy houses. But Mr. Frick didn't want that. He wanted the art to be the focus, because he knew that after he died, he wanted the building and most of its art to be left to the city. or left to, the public as a kind of a public bequest. And so what he did was he asked Thomas Hastings, the architect, he wanted a house that was simple and conservative in every way. And when you look at it, you think, well, that's not simple or conservative.
Right.
It's
but
pretty
compared to the houses that were being built around him, probably.
Exactly. So they moved there finally after it was built in 1914. And they also had a son, an adult son, and he lived in Long Island with his family. So it was the three of them living in this house.
Okay. The family is so fascinating. When you're reading this book, I didn't know that much about them before, but it's so fascinating. Can you tell us more about the Frick family and also Helen Frick, because she was such a unique and wonderful character in this book that you brought to life?
Oh, I love that you say that. I agree. She's so dear to my heart, Helen. I love Helen Frick. So
very
it was
quirky.
Yeah, to say the least. Yeah, so it was this family of three. You had Henry, his wife Adelaide, and Helen. And Adelaide kind of retreated from view. They had a very terrible tragedy when Helen was still young, and the mom never really recovered from that. And so it was this family of three served by a staff of 27. So that's some ratio.
Yeah.
And they had an organist on staff. They had, you name it, they had it, a chauffeur. And it was interesting because Helen really stepped up to become her father's confidant, both socially and in terms of the art collecting. They both loved art, and they really teamed up to do that. But at the same time, they were both tough. Mr. Frick was this guy who survived an assassination attempt in the 1800s, and they took the 2 bullets out of his leg without anesthesia. Like, he was a tough man.
Yeah.
You didn't mess with him. And Helen was tough as well. They were both really, I think they had a lot of fights, and were kind of hard-headed towards each other. But at the same time, they absolutely loved each other. And Helen was very interesting because when her father died in 1919, he left her $38 million. And so she became the richest unmarried woman in America at that time.
Wow.
Right. And what happened was, it's so wild. And so she and her mom stayed on at the mansion after he died. After the mom died in 31, it became the Frick Collection. And so it opened in 1935 as a place where the public could come and see the art. And at that point, Helen moved to a farm just north of the city. And she was described in a New Yorker profile as a woman of extremely robust prejudices. Because things like if her friends bobbed their hair, she cut them off. She unfriended them because she wore a pompadour and a bun her entire life.
Wow.
She was very old school.
Yeah,
and
very set in her ways.
Very set. And she hated Germans. If she built this beautiful art reference library next door to the Frick, she wouldn't let anyone with a German last name entrance into her library.
Wow.
She just was pretty tough. And then, but at the same time, she did these amazing things. Like when she was very young, she started a home for factory girls in Massachusetts so that they could go and, have a place to go and rest and recuperate and take a vacation. And that was her doing. At the same time, during 1917 in World War I, she created this Red Cross unit and went with it to France to help refugees during World War I when it was so dangerous to do that. Right. So she was very brave, but also very kind of stuck in her ways. And I think actually going to Germany in World War I really affected her. That's why she hates Germans.
Right.
And her father talked about how, when she went to Grand Central, say to catch a train, she would stick along the outside of the concourse. She didn't want to enter, there's this huge concourse. She wouldn't walk through the middle of it. She stayed along the perimeter. And I think there was just something about her that was very tightly wound.
Right. So when you write about, you're writing about real people that lived in a family, how do you decide what is factual, what factual elements you're going to keep in, and where you're going to take off with fiction?
That's such a good question, because it was the first time I'd done that. I'd avoided using real people in my books until now, but the Frick, the family were just so dynamic. I felt like I had to include them. And then, how do you do it so that you're not doing caricatures and at the same time, they're long passed away. so you can only know so much. But luckily there was a descendant of the Frick family who wrote 2 beautiful biographies on both Henry and Helen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really helpful because they had a lot of inside scoop about, what their arguments were about, and, what their vulnerabilities were and what were their
Right.
strengths. And so my hope is by bringing them to the page in a way that's 3-dimensional, the viewer, the reader can understand them. And, Mr. Frick was not a sympathetic guy. He was a union buster. He did some terrible things,
Mm-hmm.
but he was a dad and he loved art, and,
Yeah, well, it's great. I mean, you bring them to life again. So for people who don't know about them, it's wonderful. And then another major character was Lillian. So what can you tell us about her, and what was your inspiration for her?
Yeah, Lillian, that was amazing. So Lillian is based on a real artist's muse named Audrey Munson. And she is carved, if you look at the cover, she's carved, that's her figure, her reclining figure above the entrance.
Right.
And so as I kind of left the tour, I looked up at that and I thought, oh, who is that? And did a Google search and found out about this woman who was very celebrated for her perfect beauty. She had this aquiline nose and a small chin and, thick dark hair and curvy hips, everything that was neoclassical beauty at that time. And she posed for sculptors, and her figure can be found all over Manhattan. She's in front of the Brooklyn Museum, by the New York Public Library. At the Plaza Hotel, there's that fountain in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
She rises up from the fountain. That's her
Wow.
figure. There's, I think, 3 of her at Columbus Circle. There's the Titanic Memorial, the Fireman's Memorial. She's just everywhere. And so she was very famous. And then her landlord killed his wife in this kind of brutal, bloody murder. And the police, when they were investigating, found a black and white photo from an ad that Audrey had done of her in a bathing suit. And they decided it must be a love triangle. And so to escape kind of the scrutiny, she and her mother moved upstate, and nothing went well after that. She tried to get into film and it didn't work. And then, at one point she tried to commit suicide by drinking mercury.
Oh my God.
And she had a lot of mental issues at that point. And then her mother put her in an asylum where she died in 1996 at the age of 104.
Oh, wow.
It's wild. And, at that time she was buried in an unmarked grave. And I just thought, looking at her, this amazing woman has kind of been lost to history because we know the sculptors' names, but we don't know her name.
Right.
Similarly, in a way that we know Henry Frick's name, but not necessarily Helen's. They both are overshadowed by the men in
Right.
their lives. And I started wondering, here we have these 2 women who are connected by the mansion. And what if the free-spirited Audrey Munson character, bumped into the very prickly, temperamental Helen Frick? Like, what would happen?
Right.
And so in my writer's mind, I just started imagining, what if Audrey, and I call her Lillian in the book because I change a lot of things that happen in her life. So I haven't given away any spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, Lillian is at, the height of the scandal, and she's looking up at herself in the doorway from the sidewalk and wondering what's going to happen to her, and remembering, how good she had it. And I thought, well, what if the door opens and this woman, comes out and yells at her and says, "Hurry up, you're late, get inside." And then I thought, well, what if she goes inside and realizes that she's been mistaken for an applicant for the job of private secretary to Helen Frick? And what if she gets the job, a job that she is completely not able, unqualified for?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so yet both these women are connected to art and the love of art in the same way. So how could they, how would they communicate with each other? And that's really where the story came from, was just that initial idea.
I love that. I didn't realize that so much of her life was, I thought that was all fictional, except the fact that she was a model. Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and I highly recommend anyone who wants to know more about Audrey Munson. There's a number of podcasts about her, including the Bowery Boys. And there's a wonderful book that was a really great resource for me called Curse of Beauty by James Bone.
Okay.
And that's all about her. It has some photographs. It's really, really pretty incredible.
I can just imagine you looking up and then going down the road and learning about her and being like, this is going to be perfect. Like,
yes. And at the same time, though, slightly terrified that I'm making a fictional character meet a real, a person with a real name.
right.
Like Lillian and Helen, how will the readers react to that? And so that's why in the author's note, I try to explain really, really carefully what's fact, what's fiction, so readers can go down that same rabbit hole if they want.
Right. Well, you did such a good job, and I actually loved reading your author's note too. I was such a fan after I finished the book. I was like, I had all these questions I wanted to just call you and ask you, but you answered a lot of them in the author's note, so it was really great.
Good.
But speaking of research, so I know, for myself, writing historical fiction, you do so much research, and it can be very different for each book that you work on. So what was, you did the behind the scenes tour, but what other kind of research did you do for this book?
Yeah, this was an interesting one because, I took that tour in January of 2020, and then we went into lockdown.
Oh, just in time.
Yeah, I know, right? And so I couldn't get inside, but very luckily the Frick has a 360-degree floor plan on their website at frick.org. And so you can go into any room and look around. And so that's what I did. I had it like bookmarked on Chrome. So I just clicked there. All right, what's going on in the library? Where should they be sitting? What would they look? What's out the window? And so that was really, really helpful. And on top of that, the people at the Frick, the staff and the archivists were so helpful, where I could look at dinner menus from a dinner party that they held for 30 people back in 1915. And, what were the 7 courses that they had? Or, they had the payroll. So I could look at all the staff, what they were paid, what their names were, what they did. And that kind of thing's so helpful because, as you know, you're looking for the details that will really jump out. You don't want to over describe things.
Right.
So like choosing the right ones.
Right. Yeah.
The crazy course in a dinner menu, it just is enough to kind of ground the reader, I think, in the time period. And that from writing about the 20s.
Yeah. And when you find those menus and things like that, that's the sort of treasure that it brings the story to life.
Oh, completely. And I don't know about what you do, but I tend to love to interview people, or people who've written books on the subject. So I talk to architectural historians. I spoke to a former director at the Frick who's now at the Morgan, who was very helpful, telling me kind of, what goes on. Reading the biographies were really helpful. There was a lot to play with, even like finding, a 1905 book about how to become a private secretary.
Right. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not doing computers back then.
Right.
And so how do you describe the filing system and that kind of nerdy stuff? I love it.
Yeah. Well, you end up also getting so much more information than you could possibly ever put into your book, right? But you have to know it just to be able to create that world.
Yes.
But there's so much going on in this book. There's mystery and there's hidden clues, and then there's the dual timeline. Was there ever a point where you got stuck with writing this book? And if you did, what did you do?
Yeah, I tend to get stuck in the early phase because I do tend to outline, I figure out who the characters are, and then I outline each timeline. So I know pretty much what their journey will be. And then it's a matter of, the problem with this book was I couldn't give away too much in the older timeline too early, because that would totally screw up the scavenger hunt.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. I needed that to extend long enough that the reader goes along for the ride, and it's not like, oh, well, we found it, so everything's fine now. Right. I can't have that happen in chapter 10. And so that was tricky, that finagling of getting those two together. But once I had that, the rest of the story flowed pretty well, a little easier than my other books, which was interesting. And I don't know why.
Oh, interesting. Can you talk a little bit also about the characters Veronica and Joshua? Yeah.
So that timeline is the 60s. And Veronica's a fish out of water, much like Lillian is, where she's kind of an unlikely model. She's new to it. She's intimidated by everybody. And so when it goes wrong, it's, really no surprise. And what I wanted is for her to kind of have to do this scavenger hunt. And Joshua was helpful because he's an expert in the art on the Frick walls. So he could really help her and guide her as he does it. But at the same time, I was writing this during 2020 when America was in a whole lot of turmoil. And I started wondering about what's missing from very Eurocentric art history, which is diverse perspectives. And so I ended up interviewing art, curators and experts who are Black, who it's so hard to make your way in the art world to start with. But if you're a person of color, it's, not easy. So they told of their amazing stories of what they did and how they did it, but also, about things like, showing up for a workshop and having the person running it ask them what made them qualified to be there, whereas no one else was asked that.
Right.
Or going to a museum and taking a tour and raising their hand and just never being called on. And so I decided to make Joshua Black so that he can kind of provide what's missing on the Frick walls, and that is, other perspectives and the forgotten Black artists who helped shape art history. And, a bigger context on the Frick family and that kind of thing. And he's actually named after who's considered the first Black painter in America, Joshua Johnson,
right,
who painted affluent whites in Baltimore in the late 1700s. And so it was really kind of interesting to go down that road and see what came of that. And the thing about that timeline was I decided to keep it really compressed. So it's only 2 characters over 3 days, pretty much all in the Frick mansion. And so because of that, their relationship becomes really important. And how do these 2 strangers deal with each other in this situation, and what will happen?
And have you done that kind of thing before, or was this different for you for writing this dual timeline?
That was different. I just, I think because I've written now 6 books with dual timelines, that's 12 stories. And I just wanted to give myself a little challenge to it and just see what happened.
Yeah, I love it. So this is such a beautiful cover, so gorgeous. Can you tell us, how did the cover come to be, and also the title?
Yeah, they did such a great job. This is Christopher Lynn is the art director at Dutton, who's the publisher, and he's great. I supplied kind of the photo of the doorway. I gave them a few different ones to play with, but this one was the best. And he placed that figure on the steps and wrapped it in the magnolia blossoms. And, I think what it does is it really, it's so eye-catching. And I've had so many people reach out to me and say, oh, I don't read historical fiction, but I bought this because of the cover. And so that's a testament to, to the art directors of the world.
Definitely.
So, and the name came about because on the front of the lawn, there's these 3 beautiful magnolia trees. And it was hard to figure out how to name this book, because in all my books, the title needs to do 2 things. It needs to refer to the building and to the story. So like for the Lions of Fifth Avenue, most people know there are lions in front of the New York Public Library. And then the name of the family inside is the Lions, but spelled a little differently.
Right.
And with this book, the Magnolia Palace came to me first from the trees. And then I decided, there was a diamond missing in it. And I thought, what if it's a pink diamond? And we'll call it the Magnolia diamond. And then we solved all the problems. So there's a lot of search and replace.
Yeah, I love it. And so let me ask you, if this were to get made into a movie, do you have any idea who the characters would be? I have a hard time with this myself. I'm not good at it.
It's tough. Although, I have to say, I would love either Lillian or Veronica, the model, could be played by the woman who did the Queen's
Gambit.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, she's so good.
Big eyes, and
I could picture her for her totally. Yes.
Yeah. So I think she'd be great. And then for Mr. Frick, I think Anthony Hopkins.
Ooh.
Right, because he's got that gravitas and those blue eyes, which Mr. Frick had very, very blue eyes.
Yeah.
Anya Taylor-Joy. Yes, that's
Anya Taylor-Joy. Yeah, that's it. That's her.
And then for the interesting thing would be Helen, because I have so many people tell me how much they love her. And I was thinking, she was kind of a redhead, either Emma Stone or Jessica Chastain.
Oh, yeah.
We could do it.
It could work. So we'll just put that out into the universe.
Thank you. Yeah, you're in California, so make that happen.
I'm
please.
close. I'll do, next time I walk past Emma Stone on the street, I'll just let her know.
Just hand her the book.
Yeah, we got a book ready for her. And so what are you working on now?
Yeah, so there's a couple things in the hopper. I was asked to do a short story for Amazon. It's an anthology of historical fiction authors. And so I decided to set that one at Carnegie Hall. And I'd done some initial research on that and learned that when they built it, they included like 180 or 107 artist studios that are built on top of it, like this little city on top of the hall.
Oh, wow.
And people who've passed, like Marlon Brando lived there. Martha Graham passed by, Mark Twain would be in there, all of these amazing people, Bill Cunningham from the New York Times. And so that book is set there, and it's just a short story, but it was really fun to write. And then as I was trying to figure out where to go next in terms of buildings, I got an email through my website from a woman who said, I'm in my 80s, I'm a former Rockette, and if you ever want to know about the secrets of Radio City, you should call me.
How can you say no to that?
Yeah. Like, yeah, sure. So I called her and we had an amazing conversation, and I've talked to a number of Rockettes, I'd say about a dozen. And it's incredible, the stories and just the sisterhood of that troupe. And what it was like being in your 20s and the 50s and dancing, and because you've written a book called The Showgirl about dancing in New York in your 20s.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just a really fun story to write. And we'll see
So
where
fun.
it goes.
Oh, I can't wait for that one. That's right up my alley. What about for people who are aspiring writers, or they're trying to write a novel themselves? Do you have any tips or any advice for them?
Yeah, I always say, don't feel like you have to write the great American novel by the time you're, 30. That it's okay to go out and live your life and do other things, and, have other careers, and fall in love and fall out of love and do that, because then you have actually something to write about in many ways.
Yeah.
And
Great
so,
advice.
yeah, I didn't start writing until I was in my late 40s. And then suddenly my career took a completely sharp right turn, and it's so much fun because it feels like it's an amalgamation of all the other things I did, being a journalist, being an actress. It all kind of merged together into this, and I'm having the best time.
I love that. I feel the same way. I didn't publish my first book until I was 40, and that was like a turning point for me. And I'd had nothing to say before then. I had to live through some experiences and a divorce and all that fun stuff to be able to write a decent book. So
yes,
I totally do agree. That's great advice.
It's a prerequisite, really.
Yeah, it really is.
And by the way, if anyone out there has not read Montauk or The Showgirl, I highly recommend it. They're great, great reads. And if you like historical fiction, they're beautiful.
Thank you. Well, this is such an amazing book. I'm so excited that I've got to ask you all of my questions. I've been dying to. Been trying to hold myself back, waiting for tonight, but I would love to take a look and see what other questions we have from people.
Sure.
So let me take a look. What do you know? Well, I should read these first. I haven't done the Q&A part before. Okay, Fiona, can you tell us how you became interested in Audrey?
Yeah. So, I think, what's so funny about asking that question is I remembered Googling her and learning about her, but just today I got an email from someone, a man who I'd met at a reading I'd done 2 or 3 years ago here in New York. And at that time, he was so sweet, and he bought the book for his daughter. And he emailed me after and said, it was nice meeting you, and you should check out Audrey Munson for your next book. And I don't remember reading that, or I remember kind of vaguely getting that email, but I'm sure that's what actually planted it in my head.
That's so interesting.
That's funny. And I only learned that today, and I went back and found the email, and I said, yeah, he was the first one. So
wow.
Kudos to Harry. Yeah.
It was almost like he was putting it out there for you.
Yeah, I would have thanked him in the acknowledgements if if I'd consciously known.
Right.
But I think that's what happens with writers, especially of historical fiction, is all these subconscious things start working them into your head. Yes. And then finally you have to get it out.
Yes. Yeah. And it's weird also how sometimes you'll figure out a problem that you're having with your writing when you're doing something completely different.
Yes.
Like, going, I don't know, playing
driving.
Driving.
Yeah.
Yes. And suddenly something will pop into your head and you're like, oh, I can fix that this way.
and it's always the simplest thing. It's something that I do that all the time, where I'm, kind of wrangling over a plot problem. And then the answer just comes out of the blue. It's so
Right.
strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Magic.
It's funny. Okay, we've got another question about writing. What do you know now about writing and the entire process that you wish you knew when you first started writing?
Oh, what a good question. I think it's not to labor over the first draft. I write a really fast kind of skeletal first draft so that I get to know the characters and the plot and I can see if it works. But I don't go back and like massage each sentence into, its prime. I just get it down. And there might be a scene where, there's 8 people nodding in a row or something in response to some, he nodded,
Right.
he shook his hand. And I just let that go and I don't, worry over the details and get it down. And in the past, early on when I was trying to write short stories and things, I would just, get stuck on a paragraph for 3 hours. And that's fine to do later, I find, once the plot and the characters are in place and feel solid. So there's kind of, a foundation there. But to do that early on, to me, is just a complete waste of time. So I wish I'd known that. And who is it? Anne Lamott says it's okay to write a shitty first draft.
Right.
And I'm all for that.
I think there's something so comforting in knowing that you just like, no, this doesn't have to be perfect yet. It's going to be perfect later. But right now, this is just getting it out on the page and figuring out what I'm writing about and who these characters are.
Exactly. Do you find that you kind of outline first and then write, or do you just jump in and see what?
I tend to know where it's going. And sort of I know the beginning, the middle, and the end. But then things happen along the way that I wasn't expecting. However, with the book that I'm working on right now, I planned it out a little more. I did a little bit more plotting, and I don't know. I'm not sure which one I like better. I don't know if I like sort of just being more free with it or planning it out. But I'm playing around. How about you?
Yeah, I do. I definitely tend to plot.
Yeah,
pretty carefully. Even the short story I did, I had kind of scribbled out the outline of it on a piece of paper before I started. I need those guideposts. I think it comes from being a journalist.
Right.
That's why I need the scaffolding of the historical facts to layer the story on.
Right.
I need something to hold on to because the blank page is just too terrifying.
Right. It can be kind of daunting when it's staring back at you. So yeah. No, go ahead.
Can I ask you, can you tell a little bit about, do you want to talk about the book that you're working on? Do you want to just give us a taste, or would you rather not? Whatever you want.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Montauk, my first book, took place in the 30s. My second book, The Showgirl, took place in the 20s. So now I'm working on a book in the 40s. I mean, figured it makes sense. And this one, it's right after World War II. And my main character, Hazel, has been working in the airplane factories in Los Angeles during the war. But then the war's over and they're like, all right, ladies, thanks very much for your help. Go back to being a housewife. And she's not a housewife and she doesn't know what she's going to do with her life. So she has to figure that out. So she ends up going down to Laguna Beach in California, and she ends up working with a cantankerous but very famous artist in Laguna. And she gets very deeply involved in his world and in the art world down there in Laguna, which is like this artist colony. So it's a lot of fun to write.
Our books are really good matching pairs because they're both about the art world in some aspect and also about women really finding their voices, I think.
Right. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
That's one theme that I think we both have in common in all of our books.
Yeah, we do. I have a question for you. Well, Susan has a question for you. Do you think you'll ever write a book set outside of New York City?
Ooh, I would love to. And, whenever I was just in South Carolina on a book tour, and it was just so incredible. Everywhere I go, like the guy driving me to the event was like, oh, you have to hear about this hospital that was transformed into these amazing buildings that are around America. My first inclination would probably go to London and write a book that's set there, just because that I've spent a lot of time there and that would be so much fun. And I could write it off. So, hey.
Right. Yeah. little travel. And, you'd have to do a little side travel to Paris. And
of course. So, that would be great. But we'll see. There's just so many great places.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. If there are no more questions, are there any more? Oh yes, Susie Schnall says you'll need a research assistant. I think you might need a few.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if people know, but there's a group of us who are all authors and one blogger who are, and Linda's coming too, who we all do a Zoom every so often and kind of touch base, especially during COVID. And so it's really been wonderful. And yeah, I think we should all do a road trip for research.
For research, yes, definitely. I love it. Well, I'm seeing if there are any other questions. Oh, yeah, there is another one. Do you lead your characters or do they lead you?
Ooh, I like that. Once I figure out who they are, they tend to lead me. I've never thought about that, but that's absolutely true. I'll start writing a scene and they really tell me where they want to go and how they're going to do it.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I always thought it was cheesy when I would hear authors say, the characters really take on a life of their own. And I was like, do they though? Like, how is that even possible? But they do. Sometimes I'll be writing and they'll end up doing something or saying something that I'm like, what are you doing? Don't say that.
Yes. I remember writing in the Chelsea Girls, I was writing a love scene and the characters started breaking up. And it was like watching your parents fight. I was like, what's going on? Don't do that. But it was the right thing. They did better than I did. We sound like we're insane, really. We do.
We're like, it's subconscious. Well, I think you have to be a little bit, to write a decent book. Well, this is so wonderful. I've so enjoyed talking to you. And I think Claire is hopping on from Village Books, where your books are available to buy.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in. And Greg says he'll be the baggage handler for our trip.
Perfect.
This is hilarious. And thank you, Claire, for having us. This has just been such a treat.
Well, of course, this has been so fun to listen to and watch. And I actually have a question for both of you. I like to ask my author guests this because I'm endlessly fascinated by this. How do you know when you're done? Is it very obvious to you when you're done, when you write that last sentence and you type the period and it, or is there ever a lingering, like, I don't know. I'm just curious about this from both of you.
It's like, when is it done in terms of like the final thing going off to be published? To me, it's when I can't bear it. I can't read it another time. Like after doing 10 drafts, you're so embedded in it, but there's always that feeling of, oh, what did I miss? And there's always something, there's always some minor thing that, didn't get caught. And that's what keeps me up at night. Okay.
How about you, Nicola?
Well, when you say done, I'm thinking about the ending of the book. And so, I've just written the ending of the book that I'm working on right now, the one that I just talked about. And there's this very exciting feeling that happens when you're sort of getting close to the end, because everything starts to come together and all this work that you've been doing, you're like, maybe this is going to work, maybe this isn't. It all starts to like wrap up and come together. And it's probably my favorite part of the writing process is when you get towards the end. So I feel like what you're going towards, and so yes, I know when I'm done. Like I know what I'm heading towards, and then I know when I get there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm endlessly intrigued by that. I'm not a writer at all. I am 100% a reader, but at that, I always wonder about, like, how do they know like that? It seems like a gift to me that to know when you're done. But gosh, I just want to thank you both so much. Of course, I am putting in the chat. There is the link to the page at Village Books where all of the books are listed. And of course, we will ship anywhere except internationally. I'm sorry, Canadian friends. But we do have these autographed book plates. So if you do purchase Magnolia Palace from Village Books, you will get one of those autographed book plates while supplies last. So ladies, do you have any final words for our audience?
Oh, just a huge thank you for book selling and hand selling and helping get the word out about our books. It makes such a difference. We really can't tell you. And thank you for connecting us with so many wonderful readers. It's fantastic. And thank you, Nicola, doing this. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been so much fun. And yes, Claire, thank you so much for selling our books and getting the word out. And if anybody would like to follow along on our publishing journeys, I'm mostly active on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm at Nicola Harrison Author. And what are you, Fiona?
Yeah, Fiona Davis Author on Instagram and Facebook. Come and play. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I guess with that, we will say good night. So bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.